Excited to be back with all of you and with these two fantastic experts devoted to the thing that I think all of us in the room are, is just making this a more sustainable, livable planet. In the title of this session is the word resiliency, and so I wonder if we could start out by just talking a bit about resiliency versus adaptation, because I admit that I probably use those words interchangeably and maybe I shouldn't.
Would you like me to start?
Sure, please.
Sure. So it's a really good question, and one that, in the financial sector, people kind of confuse a lot. There's actually quite a big overlap in the Venn diagram, in my opinion. And maybe the nuances aren't that important if you're trying to get people to act on climate change or resilience. But I think of adaptation as the umbrella. We all are going to need to adapt to a warmer world. We've already locked in warming. And that warming is already having an impact. And so if we stopped emitting today, we would still have to adapt to the warming that is coming our way. And resilience is a subset of that. So I think of resilience as resilience of communities, resilience of assets in particular, but also it's a response to the fact that we have to adapt to the warming world. Alongside kind of resilience as a subset of adaptation, there's a whole bunch of other things that happen in finance that are kind of co-related to that idea too.
Could you talk a bit about how we might think about adaptation and resiliency differently, or if we should, if they are actually just the same thing?
Well, actually, I agree with Stacy. I think we often use it interchangeably at Edison and when we talk about it, but we do see it as a component of adaptation, that as we think about adapting to this changing climate, and to Stacy's point, already changing climate, and we're seeing that certainly impact today in California with the wildfire threat, and even here. I was surprised that the panel about the deluge did not mention the fire in Sun Valley that happens in the book, but that we're experiencing. So I think we think of it as a really key component of adaptation, just like you were talking about.
Adaptation and resilience, in my mind, are very similar ideas. If I had to make the distinction, I would say adaptation is an umbrella concept, of which resilience is a sub-concept, right? We absolutely are going to have to adapt to the warming world that is coming our way, that's here today. And resilience, thinking about how to make things resilient or how to make communities resilient, is a concept through which to think about how we're going to need to adapt.
And obviously the framing of all this, the framing of all this, right, is that we need money to do these things. We know how to address climate change, but ultimately, these things cost money. And so as we think about that in this conversation, how specifically maybe if we just think about the world of investors, how are you seeing the way that their decisions are changing, the way that the money is shifting?
Well, the money's not shifting fast enough, as we all know. But I do believe in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been this grand awakening. Awareness is really high that climate change is a financial risk. Understanding about what to do about that is still pretty low, right? So matching awareness with understanding in terms of investment decision-making is where the magic is gonna happen, and it has to happen fast, as we know. But in terms of getting the finance flowing, one of the ways that I think about that is, somebody earlier said the financial system is a system that we absolutely need to address. And I think about how we're going to do that as integrating into the DNA of that system measures related to climate risk, particularly climate-related financial risk, because investors move when they think their investments are at risk. Right? That is something that is a rational behavior for most investors, right? Investment, though, is just one part of the solution for adaptation and resilience, because you invest in something and then it has to be executed and implemented, which is why it's exciting to be on the stage with you, because putting the money out there doesn't get the resilience we need. Implementing and building the resilience is where the action happens. So you have to match the money with the actual execution.
And Caroline, if you could talk, I know you were sharing with me that there's basically different layers of resiliency in the work that you do with, a public utility, a critical need that we all have to have electricity, certainly during a heat wave. Could you first talk about just sort of the utility, the infrastructure's role in building resilience and how you're seeing that change?
Yeah. Well, I think from Edison International, we have both the utility, which serves 50,000 square miles in Southern California, and then we have our or unregulated business, TRIO, which helps companies with their sustainability, risk, environmental goals. And so from a resiliency perspective, we're trying to build resiliency into the planning that we do. We look at, especially in California, we see, of course, an electric-led future with our focus on trying to hit these very ambitious 2030, 2045 climate goals. And a lot of that is going to be leveraging the essential nature of electricity even more than we do today. And as you were talking about how important is just even a day like today where heat is really high temperatures and air conditioning being really critical. So building into the plan, knowing what our climate risks are, looking ahead to what the models say the temperatures will be, the sea level rise will be, and building that into our plan so the infrastructure is there that is resilient, can withstand the demands on the system as customer demand and temperature and climate changes.
Could you say just a bit more about that? Because we're seeing more extreme weather than before, hotter temperatures, bigger swings in the weather, sometimes in the winter. At the same time, yes, the power demand is going up for not just air conditioning, but AI is adding a lot of demand to the grid, right? So resiliency means more than just sort of hardening against the threats that we already face, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's when we think about the system, that ready, reliable, resilient grid is so incumbent on us to make sure that we're able to deliver to our customers. And the planning around that takes financing. For a utility like us, we are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. It's putting forward a plan that we think helps deliver that future that we're all looking for. And it is significant investment. Our latest rate case, so we have proactive rate cases. We filed in 2023. What we project the need is for 2025 to 2028. And it was a $6 billion rate case that we're seeking to put into infrastructure to be focusing in on delivering the system that we need to both mitigate against climate change, because California is very much focusing on that to reduce CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions across the board, and also make sure that we're able to have a reliable and resilient system for the changes that we're already seeing, like wildfire, like increased storms. I mean, we had our first tropical storm in 84 years in January. You were talking about being in Palm Springs. I mean, it was tremendous, the amount of damage that it caused, and our system has to be able to come back from that so much more quickly when you have so much more of the economy dependent on electricity that's powering that whole economy.
Yeah, truly people's safety. I was chatting with Dr. Francis from Woodwell Climate earlier and was saying, even as someone who covers climate change and as a meteorologist, I didn't expect that in 1 year I would be covering wildfire smoke in New York City and a tropical storm in Southern California. Like, that's not, the rules, the things that we expect are changing. And so I wonder, like, when we look at the business community, you said that it's moving in the right direction, but it's not moving fast enough. How do you think we accelerate that a bit?
Well, I think yes, and I think it will move faster because when there are entities like the utility here who are investing in their resilience, they become a better credit risk, and they become a more attractive investment opportunity, not just for the public balance sheet, which is kind of sitting behind you, but also for other investors and any bonds that you might issue. One of the things that's been interesting to watch has been how rating agencies have started to integrate climate-related financial risk into some of the things that they rate, and this is relevant for utility. We are seeing in backwards-looking research that sovereigns and municipalities that are vulnerable to certain climate-related risks from a financial perspective are seeing a negative impact to their ratings, but similarly, sovereigns that are investing in resilience or utilities that are investing in resilience are seeing that negative impact go down. That's pretty interesting from my perspective, because understanding the riskiness of an asset is often done by investors by getting something like a credit rating or rating from a rating agency. It's part of their diligence. It's part of the process of identifying, assessing, and quantifying the risks of the investment they're going to make. And if that is starting to be put into those signals, let's call it that, that to me means, we're making forward progress. And the more that happens, the more likely that money will start to move in the right direction. But I will say, we have a long way to go. right? We're doing a lot of incremental investing around climate. There's a lot of bespoke climate investors out there, and we'll hear from a few of them later, which are all amazing and absolutely necessary. But if you're integrating it into the DNA of the financial system, every bank, every institutional investor, every pension fund, every public balance sheet, because by the way, that is our investments. I'm a taxpayer and a shareholder of the public balance sheet, should be invested through the lens of climate considerations. And that's both risk, but opportunities too, because we need to be playing offense, not defense here.
I mean, in my work, I cover, certainly the impacts, but also a lot of really interesting climate solutions, and they're all encouraging. But sometimes one of those stories comes along where I'm just excited, and I'm, as a person, encouraged. I wonder if you could talk about maybe something you've been involved in, because you've been involved in a lot of things that's just given you that spark inside of like, yes, more of this.
Yeah, so recently I've been pretty excited about, somebody yesterday talked about the IRA and something called the GHGRF, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The full story hasn't quite been written. It should be by this fall, but the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a $27 billion pot of money that the EPA is putting out, not just committing, but dispersing into a network of local community development finance institutions and green banks, right? If all adaptation and resilience is local, these network of small financial institutions are about to get a lot of funding to do climate-related investments, a lot of energy transition, but also a lot of resilience. Now, assuming it gets through the summer and the last little bits of kind of what's happening at the EPA, this money should be out the door before September 30th. $27 billion, just to put this into context, the carbon markets last year traded about, traded around 2 billion, so 27 billion to 2 billion. And the US international climate finance commitments have never been more than 3 billion at a time. And a lot of those commitments are not actually dispersed. So if you think about what they commit to the international climate funds, if this money gets out the door, which we're still holding our breath, but hopefully it will, this will be a huge influx of funding at the local level for climate. That makes me pretty excited.
That is really exciting, and I just learned something today. I mean, you really put that in context quite well. Thank you for bringing that up. And it reminds me of something you were saying earlier about resiliency. Like, yes, you need these big dollars, but you got to get it down to people, like in their everyday lives. So for you, resiliency isn't just transmission or distribution lines. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it connects to customers. And when we think about our customers, and I mean, a third of our customers at Southern California Edison are on income qualified rate. So higher bills make a big difference to them. And so as you think about these investments that we're making that translate into higher bills, but over time, what we're seeing is that energy share of wallet will go down because people are going to be moving away from gasoline, moving away from diesel. And so, in fact, going to a clean energy future, and if you actually accelerate that, you actually get the benefits of that faster. Those investments that we're making, we're intending to not just help electrify, but then we're also putting investments in philanthropy. And so you're talking about these community-based organizations. We put money into these community-based organizations. One, for instance, like Climate Resolve, which helps other community-based organizations be able to write grant requests to tap into that money, because some of the smaller community-based organizations, they really don't have the resources. So how do they tap into that network to be able to go after these funds? Because there's never been a more incredible time to go after that funding. And so that resiliency of not just the system, our electric system, but then building that resiliency within the community. We put out a paper called the Climate Adaptation and Vulnerability Assessment, and one of the things that it showed was, even though California has a requirement that cities have climate resiliency plans, most cities actually don't, because they also are constrained, especially the smaller cities. They don't have the resources to do that analysis. So again, how do we connect our cities to resources that can help them build a plan and then execute that plan? And how do we work in conjunction with them, so that as we're putting in infrastructure, they're upgrading their infrastructure. So we're not tearing up the street twice. We're tearing up the street at the same time. We're putting in green space at the same time. Things like that, working in partnership. It's a big commitment, and one of the things that was required, and we were really happy to see this, is more community engagement in terms of hearing from the community in terms of what they need to build that into our planning as we go forward.
Excellent. And we are running short on time, but maybe if you could just each give me just like 1 or 2 sentence answer to this. when we think about the ideal world that we all want to live in, that is resilient, where we have mitigated the source of climate change, what is something about that ideal future that excites you the most or gives you hope?
So I know this is sort of silly, but one of the things that I get really excited about is how quiet the future is going to be. An all-electric future is incredibly quiet. If you've ever driven an electric car or a hybrid car, you realize, dang, these things are super quiet. And you can hear birds chirping in your neighborhood when you drive down the street and the windows are open. And I mean, you can hear conversations that maybe you shouldn't be hearing. But in any case, it's a much quieter future when I think about mitigating carbon and being more resilient.
Yeah, so I guess the perfect future for me is, we're not going to be able to solve climate change without the financial system. And the financial system hasn't been helping us. We know that. And the perfect future for me is that every dollar is invested through a climate lens, or yen, or euro, or pound, and that we have the practitioners inside the financial system doing different types of investing, whether it's early stage equity or growth equity or banking or investing in the stock market, that can identify, assess, and quantify climate as both a risk to be reduced, but also an opportunity, because that opportunity to invest in the sustainable future is absolutely where all the money needs to go, right?
Excellent.
And what about you?
Oh, well,
You on the spot.
Well, you're putting me on the spot, but honestly, I really just got caught on this picture that you were painting of like a future that's so quiet where there are no gas leaf blowers and more electric cars. And you can hear birds chirping, or you could hear the breeze blowing through the trees. Like those are the kind of things that just, make me happy.
In harmony with nature.
In harmony with nature. Caroline, Stacy, thank you both so much. Thank you, everyone.